Get Rich Education is brought to you by Audible. More than 150,000 audiobooks to choose from for your mobile device.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Welcome to Get Rich Education, episode 21. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Our mission is to invest like the wealthy do, and with investments that are available to most anybody. Here's hoping that you had an abundant week. You know, I'm trying to. A week ago, my wife flew to Asia to visit family, and I am tiring of cooking for myself and running out of food. There's still food in the fridge, but all the fresh, good, perishable stuff is gone, and I'm getting into the processed food, and I don't think this is leading to a healthy place. The free radicals inside my body are beating back the antioxidants and winning that battle or something, so... Hey, today's the day that I didn't think I'd have. It's about me. Right from the first words of episode 1, I said I'm glad that you're here. But you're not here for me, you're here for you. That's why this show focuses on how I can help you pull yourself up. But I've had some inquiries to tell more about myself, and I will do that today. Today will still give you perspective into how you see yourself and your peers. If you don't want to hear more about me, forward ahead to learn more about the city that I choose to live in 9+ months a year, Anchorage, Alaska, and its real estate market. You'll find yourself saying, wow, I had no idea, more than once. I grew up in Appalachia, remote upstate Coudersport, Pennsylvania, in a county that has more white-tailed deer than people. Seriously. It was not an affluent upbringing. We were lower middle class. We weren't poor, though. My parents provided a great moral upbringing, and they're still together today living in that same Coudersport home. My parents were never into entrepreneurship or investing or real estate. Kurt and Penny Weinhold both emphasized having a vibrant life outside of your day job. Do good work, but don't ever let your workaday job be your identity. And they both had a love of travel, adventure, and outdoor sports. You know what? 4 episodes ago, I discussed how live below your means. Those 4 words are some of the worst advice one ever hears while growing up. Well, my dad heard that episode, and then he told me, hey, Keith, I had never told you to live below your means. And he's right. Fortunately, he did not instill that damaging, limiting mindset inside my head like a lot of parents do. So anyway, my quiet and shy teen years were focused on endurance sports competition. In fact, being quiet and shy isn't just some fuzzy memory I have. There is a photo in the Coudersport High School yearbook that I was voted the most quiet and shy guy, and Teresa Reed was the most quiet and shy girl, okay? So in high school, I took an interest in joining Future Business Leaders of America. And then outside of school, as an interest, I leveraged and traded my way to build the best, most valuable baseball card collection of any kid in town. And I still wasn't old enough to drive, so adult baseball card collectors and dealers would drive from other towns to my town to deal cards with me. And then later, when I could drive, I would go set up as a baseball card dealer at shows. So the business interest was apparent early, but I was even more interested in geography. I was always bugging my mother to open up an atlas and quiz me about world places. I got my college geography degree from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. After college in the 90s, I saw that income prospects in geography were not great. No one was going to pay me well to describe China to them. So, note that I didn't say job prospects. I said income prospects. I wanted to avoid a soul-snatching job. I kind of knew this about myself early. I'd just rather provide value to the world and receive an income in exchange for that. At age 23, I moved away from home. I rented my first place ever. It was a pool house in Westchester, Pennsylvania, outside Philadelphia. Yes, a pool house, like where you'd store swimming pool supplies, converted into a rental unit. That was my home. It was like a little detached 200 square foot hut where if you were inside it and you opened the sliding glass door to step outside and you walked straight 3 steps, you would sink into the swimming pool. The rent was $325 a month plus electric. There was only one sink for both the kitchen and the bath, and it was in the bathroom, and you would use that for toothbrushing, shaving, dishwashing, everything. I mean, I was living simply. It was not a great place. I met a nice girl one time that I wanted to hang out with more, but I was too embarrassed to bring her back there. When it got too cold in the winter, the electric wall heater didn't get the place warm enough, and I was wearing all these ridiculous layers of clothing. And I didn't even know enough to tell the landlord about something like the inadequate heater on the cold temperature days. I just thought I had to live that way, and I lived there for over a year. I always thought that my pool house landlord that lived in a pretty nice single-family home across the yard on that same property, I thought he was so lucky. I figured the $325 rent cash I gave him every month was all his spending money, straight profit. And then I was surprised to learn that he had a mortgage on the property. I didn't know how all that worked then. And during that time, I had a fairly physical job doing construction materials testing. And it was around that time where I started to realize, this money thing kind of matters. Now I see people trading away a big part of their life's finite time and energy for dollars here now that I have like a regular full-time job. Well, I want to provide value to people without selling my soul. And during that time, always interested in travel, I made 4 vacations from Pennsylvania away to Alaska in the late 90s. And after one of the long trips, I returned to Westchester, Pennsylvania, and I discovered that I lost my job because I was gone in Alaska too long that time. I was fired. And, I did not accept unemployment checks at that time, even when I qualified, because to me, that would take from others without providing value to others. I just considered that an immoral transaction. I'm just one of those people that's never missed a credit card payment or even made a late payment on a credit card in my life either. That's just kind of how I operate. Someone else would probably describe me as an optimist. I just always seem to think I can find a way to do something. I'm usually right. Sometimes I'm wrong, but anyway, with each of those successive Alaska trips, I knew that I would end up living here where I am now. And in 1999, I sold all my vintage Star Wars action figures to a national dealer for $4,500 as a moving fund. And I drove a 1995 Chevy Blazer 4,500 miles from Pennsylvania all the way to Anchorage, Alaska, and stayed ever since. At 300,000 plus people and as the largest city in Alaska, Anchorage has a lot of city amenities. Yet you can be in complete raw wilderness, just a 20-minute drive from town. Few places have that convenient access to both. I just didn't find that in Denver, Salt Lake City, or elsewhere. Anchorage has ocean, mountains, and a really robust park and trail system for that skiing, biking, and running that I do. There's almost no traffic. And there are warmer summers than most think. Winters can be long, dark, and cold, though, so that's when I stack up more vacations. But that move from Pennsylvania to Alaska was a turning point in my life, and it's perhaps the best decision that I ever made. You know what else this moving process taught me? It taught me about human nature. It revealed to me, really, the time and money lies that people tell themselves, and that my mentality was somewhat different. Though I probably didn't use these words at the time, I found that I had more of an abundance mentality than most, even though I sure didn't have more than most. Here's what I mean. I moved to Anchorage, knowing basically no one. I had no job, no income plan. In fact, I was the only winehold in the state until 8 years later when I married my wife. Okay, so leading up to leaving Pennsylvania, when people had asked me about my upcoming Alaska move, People already thought that sounded crazy in itself. I mean, most people don't travel much. So they just thought that Alaska sounded so far away, so far-fetched. They looked at me like I was going to go try and colonize Mars all by myself or something. And inevitably, it seemed like Pennsylvania people were always asking me about a job. Well, I didn't have one set up here in Anchorage. I wasn't that concerned about it. So upon hearing that news, on top of the far-fetched Alaska thing, people just about fell off their stools. A couple people thought it was cool that I was going after what I loved and then decided to let everything fall into place. But most people were like, dude, you're going to a faraway frozen place, you don't know anyone, and you'll be unemployed. And my answer was, yes. You know, they say seeing is believing, but sometimes when you want something in life, you have to decide instead to believe to see rather than see to believe. Believe to see. You know, a lot of people said to me, isn't that risky to move so far away where you have to support yourself and have no way to do that? My thought was kind of, isn't it worse than risky to move somewhere else just because you have a job that you don't even like there, rather than go where you can have what you really want? I mean, to me, what's risky is first chasing any job for income by following money to a place where you're less than your happiness, and then afterwards seeing what life you have left over. I mean, that's even worse than risk. That's kind of baking suboptimal time right into your life timeline that you'll never recoup. That's significantly riskier than what I was setting myself up to do, which is first living happiness and then filling in around it with your income needs. So basically, I probably didn't articulate it like this well to people then, but what I was telling people in the world that I was leaving is that you cannot buy happiness. You have to live happiness. Don't follow money and be a servant to money. Life is too short for that. Life is so much more important than money. Instead, you need to live how you want to live, and there are plenty of ways to make money follow you. I've talked about them for 20 prior episodes now, and it's been so fun to share that with you. So this Anchorage move was a turning point in my life because I began to discover something true about society that people don't want to admit. And that is this: most people value the quantity of their money more than the quality of their time. I don't relate to that. I'll say that again. Most people value the quantity of their money more than the quality of their time. In my experience, people like to say that time is more important than money, but I often see people making all sorts of decisions that go against that, including moving to a place they'd rather not move to in order to chase money. I see people separating themselves from their families 60 hours a week so that they can work optional, extra overtime hours. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do, but other times they're just placing money ahead of time. I see most people follow a money trail through life rather than a happiness trail. Many people are badly out of position. When you learn how to make money follow you like I have, you're free to blaze your own happiness trail, and money will just tag along as your backpack in your chosen direction rather than you following a trail guided by money instead. What we're basically talking about here is lifestyle architecture. How are you going to lay life's foundation, and how are you going to build it and design it? Are you going to choose to pour your concrete foundation on money or build a foundation on you? Now, I did get an income in the form of a job shortly after the big move to Anchorage, but I soon read about how I could be better compensated while creating value for others and found Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. After living in Anchorage for a bit, I had made two good friends my age that had owned rental property, and after living in Anchorage 3 years, I bought my first ever property, which was a fourplex at 925 East 45th Court in Midtown Anchorage. I lived in one unit and rented out the other three. I sure didn't have much money for that down payment, but you know, I didn't need it. I used an FHA loan with 3.5% down, a vehicle that you can still use to buy a fourplex with today, by the way. I think I still have a copy of that down payment cashier's check back there from 2002 for about $12,000 or whatever it is. So that accelerated making other people's money work for me. The tenants made the mortgage payment, allowing me to leverage a higher asset value than I would with just a single family home, but yet I provided value back to tenants with sound housing. So that's the first real estate I ever owned. Therefore, one day in my life, I was a tenant renter, and the very next day, a fourplex owner. And I owned that fourplex for a few years before I even understood everyday real estate investor terms like leverage or cash on cash return. And real estate still wasn't much of a thing in my life after a few years. I was still focused on competitive athletic competitions, and then I soon met my wife. It wasn't until 2005, 3 years later, that I really started feeling what this leveraged cash flowing fourplex was doing for me. I moved out into a single family home, and when I did that, I was both living better and I went from 3 rent incomes to 4 rent incomes because now all 4 fourplex units could be occupied with tenants. Yeah. I learned that I was getting paid to borrow money. Yes, getting paid to borrow money. In 2007, I transferred the equity from that first fourplex into another fourplex using none of my own money. It was accumulated equity from the original fourplex, and then there were 8 rent incomes. And yeah, I definitely had some stresses and hardships dealing with tenants from time to time, like you almost certainly will if you self-manage. I mean, seriously, dealing with some tenants can make you lose faith in humanity, I swear. They just don't have the same standards and morals as a get-rich-education listener. Plus, seriously, whenever I went inside one of my rental units and looked around, I had to keep saying to myself, I don't know if I've ever had a tenant that's actually owned a vacuum cleaner. I mean, really. And I've never owned slummy places. So, in 2008, I hired my first property manager, making this income now basically passive. I probably should have hired out management sooner. With a manager, income showed up and truly followed me without my involvement. Now, I did kiss a frog with my first property manager and had to replace them. They were poor communicators, and I saw that they didn't properly prepare a vacant unit for the next tenant. Then I found the right property manager, a prompt, communicative, professional one, and I still use them today, Roy Briley Property Managers. They're such a key piece, probably the most important member of my local team. This was also around the same time I began attending real estate seminars and classes, and then acting on that information, allowing for more leveraged growth. People still say to me that I'm a young-looking guy to own all this real estate or have all these connections. But, the truth is, there isn't any secret to this. If you just seek out the right information and then actually act, sort of moving at the speed of instruction, then you don't have to go back and try to remember what it was that you learned before or start waffling or getting into overanalyzing. It's just a more straightforward think, plan, and then do. So through leverage, arbitrage, cash flow, tax-deferred exchange, and economies of scale with a property manager, I turned that $12,000 cashier's check from 2002 into nearly $1.7 million worth of larger apartment buildings 10 years later, and that's just what I've done in the Anchorage market alone. So if you're newer to real estate, you're just learning those terms and you may not even know how this is possible. We help you understand this on this show. If you're an experienced real estate investor, you get it and you know how that and even more is possible. Hey, it's definitely worth noting during that time that Anchorage was a market that did not experience pain during the 2008-2009 mortgage meltdown and foreclosure crisis. Values stayed stable. Anchorage felt its real estate pain in the 80s. So I was in the right market, and like I've explained on this show before, in real estate investing, the market is more important than the property. And then in addition to that, I opened myself up to doing more learning and how to buy property in other US states and countries and deploy new equity elsewhere. So looking back, note that my real turning point was the mindset that helped me move away from Pennsylvania. It really wasn't that more tangible purchase of the first fourplex. That really just continued the abundant mindset that was already developed. Oh, I do some desk quality assurance work for an employer, but I can tell you that it's been a long time since I've worked 40 hours a week. Boy, doesn't that feel good to say out loud. As I taper completely out of that, I'm mostly just finding a way to replace the health benefits for my wife and I. So how can I do this? It's because I've made money follow me passively. So if you think about my interests and where I've come from the teenage years having an interest in both business and geography, well then really the confluence of business and geography is real estate. So follow your heart, not your wallet. Begin with the end in mind. You ultimately don't want money in your life as much as you want peace, joy, love, happiness, and freedom anyway. So secure those things first and then work your way back, and you will live a more gratifying life. You know, it was Robert Kiyosaki that said, often it's not the smart that get ahead in life. It's the bold. So consider going against the grain when your gut tells you to and when your head backs it up. I mean, why would you want to conform to normal? That's so limiting. Put another way, as I've said before, be who you are becoming. Just start to be who you are becoming. That's more authentic anyway. That's who you want to be. That's being the real you. I mean, you can either go after what you want or go after what others think you're supposed to want. In time, if you adopt this attitude, it will become infectious to those around you too. In that way that others see you, you know what? You're going to be much less likely to be a drain and more likely to be a fountain. So, hey, well, more when we come back. I think you're going to find this fascinating. I'm going to tell you about the real estate market and business climate in Anchorage, which is where I am now and where my wife and I have a home, right after this. For Get Rich Education listeners, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. You can download a free audiobook written by one of the guests I've had on the show, like Garrett Sutton, Tom Wheelwright, Tom Hopkins, or Judy Robinette. Or pick another audiobook for free. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/getricheducation. Again, that's audibletrial.com/getricheducation for your free audiobook.
This is Entrepreneur on Fire's John Lee Dumas. Don't follow money. Make money follow you with Get Rich Education.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. So what about Anchorage, Alaska, and what about its real estate market? My wife and I live here 9 to 10 months a year. I'm traveling the other months. We're here for the great lifestyle, and if you've visited here, then you already understand that. So here in the northwesternmost part of North America, Alaska is not an island. It borders mainland Canada, just like the contiguous 48 states do. Alaska is the largest U.S. state by area. In fact, it's so vast that it's more than twice as large as the second largest state, Texas. There is just so much unpopulated land here. The population density is sparse. There are more caribou than humans in the state of Alaska. Yeah, more caribou like reindeer than people. That's how wide open and unpopulated the state is. Alaska is larger than most world nations, though, so you don't see any caribou near Anchorage. There's a lot of diversity, and Alaska has a significant, what I would call urban-rural divide also. More than 40% of the state's population lives here in the city of Anchorage, where there are more than 300,000 residents. I mean, can you imagine living in a state where nearly half of that state's population lives in just one city? Yeah, that's what's going on in Anchorage. There are several buildings downtown, more than 20 stories high, yet most parts of the city feel like suburbs with these wide boulevards and treed city parks. Anchorage is the 134th largest metropolitan statistical area in the nation. But here's the paradox. Despite Alaska's incredibly vast amounts of untouched barren land, the city of Anchorage has a land shortage. Anchorage is situated between a water body, Cook Inlet, and the Chugach Mountains, and developable land has become hard to find. That's good for the real estate investor. So the city population grows at about 1% per year, a little less lately, and the housing supply struggles to rise. So that boosts demand, and therefore rental occupancy rates are terrific. I just talked with my property manager before this episode, and he told me that of the nearly 500 units that his company manages, 96.5% of them are occupied. I like those numbers. The major economic driver in Alaska, whether you like it or not, is, in one word, oil. Every Alaska resident, even babies, receive a permanent fund dividend check of $1,000 to $2,000 every year just for living here. So if you're a mom and dad with 6 kids, your family gets 8 of those checks every year. That check is a distribution derived from Alaska's oil wealth. Yeah, the largest oil field on the entire, not just the nation, but the entire North American continent is here in Alaska, up north at Prudhoe Bay. That feeds the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. Alaska also has 0 state income tax, 0 sales tax, and 0 municipal sales tax. And annual property taxes are under control too. They're about 1.25% per year as a percentage of a property's value. In fact, Anchorage has been named as the most tax-advantaged city in the United States. Yes. In fact, Alaska is one of the few states that has a budget surplus rather than a deficit, again, due to oil. And Alaska personal incomes make it one of the wealthiest U.S. states, again, due to oil. So, as the largest city, Anchorage is the economic center of Alaska. In fact, here's another surprise for you. The second busiest cargo airport in the United States is Anchorage International Airport. Only Memphis International does more cargo business because that's where the FedEx hub is. So, the Anchorage Airport is a major driver here, and so is the Port of Anchorage, the seaport, where nearly 90% of the merchandise cargo for this huge, vast state come into that one seaport. So really, with those job sectors, what interests a real estate investor with all these oil and distribution jobs? It's that these are jobs that cannot be easily outsourced or automated. You just can't offshore an oil job to Taiwan. That resource has to be extracted here. You just can't move an airport or a seaport job to Vietnam. Those goods need to be distributed here. So that spells a certain durability of rent income. Remember, in real estate, the job market is more important than the property. Also in Anchorage, the renter population is close to 40%. It's almost 40%. And another positive for income property owners is that there is a high degree of transiency in Anchorage. So that means that there are more people that don't live in one place for very long. And that's good for rentals. Also contributing to that, there's a big Air Force base and an Army base here, and that contributes to that transiency. Others move here and don't like the harsh winters, so they turn around and move away too. So all that spells more renters. There are definitely some economic headwinds here too. The amount of oil flowing through the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, that number one economic driver, has been in a long decline, and now the price of a barrel of oil has fallen quite a bit too. There have been some hopes to offset that with newly passed tax reform between the state and the major oil extractors here, like ExxonMobil, BP, ConocoPhillips. There are significant military cuts that often seem to be threatened, but they typically get postponed and they don't actually happen. So neither oil nor the military slowdown clouds have caused things to come to any slowdown yet. Anchorage, Alaska does have a high cost of living. There's a high cost of vacant land, a high cost of construction, a fairly high price of homes. It takes a household income of $105,000 to afford the median detached single-family home, which is valued at about $360,000. And that's not any kind of special home at all. That's just average, probably built in the 80s or early 90s with modest T111 wood siding. So the strong economy with a lack of developable land has caused a near gridlocked housing situation. Maybe I'll link an article to that in the show notes. So as far as for rental property here, non-owner occupied single-family homes and duplex buildings, they're generally just not going to give an investor positive cash flow with 75 to 80% loan-to-value loans. So you need to buy a fourplex or greater to get a 1% rent-to-value ratio, which is typically a cash flow indicator. The typical fourplex in Anchorage has $5,000 of monthly rent income and costs $500,000, so there's your 1% rent ratio, where your monthly income often exceeds monthly expenses. The Alaska Landlord and Tenant Act is investor friendly here. One can evict a non-paying tenant in weeks, not months. Utility prices are not prohibitively high here. I've never seen an air conditioning unit in a residence. It just doesn't get that warm here. In profit and loss spreadsheets, one line item expense might be snow removal. You see that sometimes. The winters are long, dark, and often cold, but they're usually not brutally cold. And the summers are really nice. So nice. They're milder than a lot of people think. Anchorage is green then. There are a lot of flowers, and the high temperatures are often in the 60s or low 70s. My wife and I's lawn is first mowed around mid-May. In fact, my wife and I sometimes get moose in our backyard. Yes, they roam freely in Alaska's largest city, and they often trample my wife's flower beds and even eat the flowers. So, well, you might wonder about Anchorage's relative geographic isolation, making me spend more travel time for all these business and real estate investing trips throughout the U.S. and Central America that I travel to and inform you about. Well, I've set myself up so that I only live 8 minutes from Anchorage International Airport, and from there it's just a 3-hour flight to the contiguous U.S. From Anchorage, I can be in LA in 5.5 hours, Hawaii or Chicago in 6 hours. New York City and Philly, yeah, that flight is kind of long. It's 9+ hours. To be in warm Hawaii any time of the year in just 6 hours, no passport, no visa, no layover, is a great escape hatch if one tires of winter cold. So, most all of these economic and demographic reasons I've just mentioned were things that I didn't even come to understand until I lived here. I moved here for the lifestyle. I live a 3-minute drive from world-class groomed and lighted ski trails. I'm just a 25-minute drive from majestic, rocky Bird Ridge, where I can hike up there with Get Rich Education's right-hand man, John Collins, and it's just me or it's just us, and bald eagles are flying overhead. From that high vantage point, you can look down over the sweeping panorama of the fjord-like water body of the Turnagain Arm. Sometimes it's dammed up with this picturesque ice-jammed flotsam, and the whole scene is majestically ringed by the partly glaciated Kenai Mountain Range and Chugach Mountain Range, and you just can't believe how lucky you are. Just a 25-minute drive from my home in a city of 300,000. At nighttime during the winter, there's the Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights, a cosmic natural light show visible from this high latitude that just always sparks awe and wonderment. From Anchorage, you can even see Denali, also known as Mount McKinley, the highest point in the continent. And sometimes I just cannot believe that I have all of this from an economically prosperous place with plenty of city amenities, great restaurants, and entertainment like Anchorage has. So, hey, well, that's about all I've got for Anchorage. I hope you like that. You know, with technology breaking down geographic barriers, you're going to hear more and more about people living where they want to live and investing where the numbers make sense, as Robert Helm says. I mean, people can be less geography specific as this new way of business is done remotely and is being gradually adopted more widely. So I bet that some listeners are going to be reading about Anchorage, Alaska on Wikipedia or somewhere after hearing this. I sure like talking about it. Hey, every week I'm here so that I can help you build your wealth. I want to turn more nobodies into somebody than anybody, show you how to make money follow you, and provide you with the best information, motivation, and world-class guests so that you can do just that. Hey, on an upcoming show, we're going to be talking with a favorite Texas director of real estate investments and property manager about the Dallas-Fort Worth investor real estate market and how to find a good property manager outside of your home market. And sorry, Texas, now we know that you're only the second largest state. Until then, don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to the Get Rich Education Podcast, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to visit iTunes and leave your comments.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.